This is Duke University.
Calvin Hill, you may have heard his name. He was born in Baltimore. He was an All-American high school football player. He then went to university, not at Duke. He actually went to Yale. And actually, when I was an undergraduate, you were the ultimate hero of the campus, and I probably saw you play every game you played when you were in college. But what was so interesting is you were the ultimate collegiate athlete, but you were much more than that. And anyone going to New Haven, Connecticut nowadays will find that the premier daycare center of New Haven is called the Calvin Hill Daycare Center, named by the community out of their love for you when you were a student. So that's a pretty interesting thing. After college, he came to Dallas. He came to play for the Dallas Cowboys. He was, I think, the Rookie of the Year. Is that not true when you came? And everybody knew that, but what perhaps not everybody knew was that during his early years playing for the Cowboys, he also did 3 years of divinity school at SMU. Is that not true? That's not true. That's true. You went on, you had a career as a professional. In other words, you were nothing if not a professional athlete, but you were lots of things besides a professional athlete. So you went on, you still, I believe, are the fourth highest figure in rushing yardage in the history of the Cowboys, and that's probably going to have some tough competition. After your own playing career ended, you have become a kind of mentor about sports in America. You have been on the Leadership Council of the NCAA, I think, for 20 years or something like that. That's a lot of advice. Thank you very much. And most recently, Calvin has had a role in the Dallas Cowboy organization as a kind of, I don't know what to call it, a coach, but not of the football. You're the coach of character. You're the coach of the other things that are also important to develop. When he was, I think, in college or shortly thereafter, Calvin met his match. This is Janet Hill. I only knew today, I told Janet, only today did I learn that you used to be called Janet McDonald. She was born in New Orleans. She went to Wellesley. I think you were a suite mate of Hillary Clinton at least one of your years in college. She was a math major. Don't you love a football player with the confidence to marry a math major? I think it's really almost the most impressive thing I know about you, Calvin. And Janet had a very significant career beside being Mrs. Calvin Hill. She got to know a person you may know who was the Secretary of the Navy, Clifford Alexander. He then formed a firm called Alexander and Associates, in which she was the other principal. They have been corporate advisors on human resources, on issues of workforce inclusiveness, strategy, communications, all those kinds of things. You've worked for firms including Major League Baseball, IBM, the Ford Foundation. You know, we could forget about him. I could tell a pretty cool story about you. And then these people, who between them have each had a remarkable career, neither of them would I ever have invited here tonight on the basis of what I have just told you. It is only the third most astonishing fact about them that makes them eligible for invitation this evening. This is, they got married, and then, as sometimes happens, they had a kid, right? And then the kid got bigger. I presume he got significantly bigger. And it turned out he was none other than Grant Hill. And who, you might ask, is Grant Hill? Well, a salient fact about him is when the time came to go to college, you must figure every college in America wanted him to come there, and the more serious they were about basketball, the more desperately they wanted him to come. And of all those schools, by a process which I hope we will soon understand, it was decided that he would come to Duke. Yes? And he made a little of a mark there. He was on 2 national championships. He played what is thought to be the colossally greatest game of basketball ever played in a collegiate atmosphere in 1992. It was he who threw in really, at the end of the world, all will be forgotten, but that shot will be recalled. But I think what we would say is, and you must feel this with such pride, which is he is nothing if not a great student athlete, but he was always much more than that. Thanks to Sterling Wilder, he had a distinguished academic career. Later in life, he now, you know that he has continued to illuminate the careers of teams in Detroit, in Orlando, in Phoenix, but he also has become one of the most significant collectors of African American art and articulators of the interest of African American art. So he's an athlete, and nothing but an athlete, but a lot more than an athlete, and I suppose we have some idea where that all came from. What I find interesting, and now I get toward the end of this story, is this. These parents, having entrusted their child to Duke, they then jumped in with him. They were asked if they would be on the parents committee. This is the committee that shakes down parents of current students. Oh, what's the correct word for that? Seeks to amplify their contributions. They not only accepted the job, but of course, you understand, these are really competitive people. I was told that when they became the head of the parent organization, they asked, what is the most successful parents committee in America? And I was told that the answer was Princeton. And of course, Calvin, having gone to a school that used to play Princeton, was damned if that record was going to last. And soon thereafter, Duke became the most successful, the most competitive parents committee in America. This was the beginning of a long life of service. Janet has been on the Fuqua Board of Visitors for how many years? 18 years? I mean, come on, okay. And I remember the day I was asked by the Board of Trustees to go to Virginia and have a chat with her in which I would insinuate the question, might she consider coming on to be a trustee of the university? That was one of the very fun hours of my life, and especially since the answer was yes. Let's have these two come up and I'm gonna ask them some questions, please. Hello. Welcome to my office.
Thank you.
And as for the people over there, forget about it. I'll see you at the reception. Okay, so I figure that we're going to be here and we're going to talk about lots of things, but I think they'll all fall within the triangle of parenting and athletics and character and education. Maybe that's a square, not a triangle. So can I just begin by asking you just a little bit? Okay, I'm gonna, you are known to everyone in this room as parents. Tell me a word about your own parents. What they were, what kind of parents they were.
Well, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and my father and mother owned a dental laboratory in New Orleans, which my father passed away in 1976. My mother ran the business for 64 years. She died in 2006 after Katrina, but not as a result of any damage from Katrina to her own home or to her, but she gave up the will to live after the destruction of the city. She just could not deal with it. Grant and I feel that's what happened. And Calvin and Grant and I feel that way. They were powerful role models for me, and I'm an only child. Calvin's an only child too, and so is Grant. So we have that only child thing down.
You have it down pat.
Yeah, we got it down pat.
And my parents were Henry and Elizabeth Hill, and they were initially from South Carolina. In the 30s, they moved from South Carolina in search of economic opportunity. They moved to Baltimore, where my mother had an aunt and uncle. And they were interesting. My mother had a high school education. The schools, I guess due to segregation, the schools that she lived, in the town she lived in, only went to the 10th grade, so that was it. My father did not go to school at all, had no formal schooling, and could not read or write until he married my mother. She was 19, he was 20, and she taught him how to read and write. And what was interesting about him is, I think that experience, having, I think about it in terms of, being in a foreign country and looking at a sign and not being able to understand that sign, and suddenly, the ability to read and write, literacy, opened a whole new world for him. And so, he was very excited about education. I didn't come along until they were 40 and 39. My mother was 39, my father was 40. So that was 20 years. And what was interesting about my father is, as soon as I was born, probably 6 or 7 months after I was born, my mother said a encyclopedia salesman came by the house, and he bought a set of encyclopedias. And I don't think he understood that they came out every year, and they were updated every year. And one of my earliest memories of that time is my father pointing to those books and just telling me, he says, when you're old enough, everything you need to know is going to be in those books. But he was a great believer in education, and was certainly delighted. I'm the first Hill to graduate from high school, and certainly the first Hill to go to college. And when I graduated from high school, I gave him my diploma, and when I graduated from Yale, I gave him my degree. And both of those hung over his bed until he died. But he believed. I was telling somebody earlier. He was a lot like Coach K, I suppose. He used to tell me that the difference between a pat on the back and a kick in the behind is 18 inches. And he was going to do both of those because he wanted to stay in contact with me, and he did it because he loved me and cared about me.
So you both had memorable parents, different parents. It must have been amazing when you met each other's families.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you got married, and then, as happens, you found you were a parent, right? And everybody knows it's quite a thrilling moment when you discover what kind of parent you're going to be, right? How would you describe the kind of parents you are?
Well, my wife Janet had a nickname. She was called the General. And so
I started off as a sergeant, and
Yeah.
I asked to be called a general.
I
I
think
was working at the Pentagon, and I felt like Grant didn't understand the hierarchy in the Army.
in football terms, I'll put it this way: I was maybe Dave Campo or Wade Phillips, and she was Bill Parcells. But no, we believed in having rules and discipline, and certainly. On both sides of the family. Grant was fortunate enough to know both sets of grandparents.
Right.
He understood how important education
That's right.
was, and he also understood how important, knowing that there is a hierarchy. I can recall one day we were discussing something, and Grant, he said, "Well, Dad, I didn't get a chance to vote." And I told him, I said, Grant, it's like it was in my family and in your mother's family. You were disenfranchised until you were able, you can certainly send a memo, but you have no votes. And but so he understood that there was a protocol, and we've never really, fascinating enough, we've never really had any problems with them.
I would like to add one thing. Grant was born here in Dallas at Presbyterian Hospital.
He's a Texan.
So Grant describes himself as a Dallasite and a Texan to everybody to this day.
What you should also know, he was not only born in Texas, he was born on a Thursday, and I was so excited.
I was not excited. I was quiet.
Well, what was interesting, I was just excited about the fact that my wife was pregnant and I was about to have a child. The doctor, because of the way she was carrying Grant, said, "I think it's going to be a girl." And so I had thousands of girls' names. What was interesting, he was a boy. And so he was born on a Thursday, and I went to practice that Thursday, and then I went back to Presbyterian Hospital, and on Friday I went and looked at him for 12 hours or however long and just watched him and just was amazed at this. It's a miracle when it happens to you. And then that Saturday after practice, I took Roger Staubach, who was a teammate, to see him and and he says, "Well, how's Janet?" I says, "Well, she's downstairs. I think she's fine." So he said, "Well, let's go see her." But when we got there, Roger, because it was every other baby in the nursery had a name, and
No name.
I had not gotten around to a boy's name, And so Roger, being the quarterback, said, well, we can't have this kid go through life being named Baby Boy Hill. And so, Roger helped us name Grant. And as Grant likes to say, it took a quarterback to make a decision.
It's a pretty fun story.
His name would have been Adrian Ayana had he been a girl.
And then we would be having a whole different discussion. So let me ask you, so you have this child, and that's the miracle that every parent has enjoyed, but then over the years, you must have become aware that actually your child had a prodigious ability in some respect. And of course, that means that being a parent was an especially blessed thing for you, but also an especially challenging thing to have that kind of gift in your family. So how did that work in the parenting?
Well, when Grant was a little boy, he played every instrument in the band because he wanted to be in the band. So he went through everything. The large, what is it called?
The bass.
The big bass, and I had to carry that to school every day. And the slide trombone, he was very bad at that. And then he took tennis. He was on a soccer team that never lost in the state of Virginia. He was on a basketball team at the age of 8. He was tall. He was probably 6 feet at the age of 12. And he met Patrick Ewing that year, and Patrick Ewing was 22 years old, had just graduated from Georgetown, and he asked him, how tall were you when you were 12? And he said he was 6 feet, so Grant knew he would be 7'2". That there was they would parallel each other, if you will, in terms of his development from then on. So that was his marker. He played varsity basketball in high school. Calvin will have to tell you about the fact that he didn't want to play as a freshman and be separated from other freshmen who were not allowed to play on the varsity. But he was very, very good. Obviously, when he was recruited by 85 schools, including Duke, and narrowed it down to 5. And I guess it was Virginia, Georgetown, Michigan, North Carolina, and Duke.
I guess that's my cue.
I heard you wanted him to go to Georgetown.
Well, I was a Georgetown fan when he was in high school. And yes, I would have liked that. He said that I would drop in every other day. And the idea of me passing through Georgetown on my way to Capitol Hill, where my office was located, was just too much to bear. So that fell off the table. And he went up to Michigan and said it was way too cold there. And Virginia had a very good school, but had changed basketball coaches, and so that was out because it was an uncertainty.
Only 2 teams are left standing.
Only 2 were left standing, and he made a memorable trip with his dad, first to North Carolina and then to Duke.
We decided that we wanted Grant to see every school on our dime before you had the official trips. And so his junior year, he and I went down and visited North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and we were on a Sunday, and we were scheduled that next day to go to Duke. And you have to understand, Janet was a fan of Georgetown. I was a huge fan of Dean Smith, and still am. I mean, I think he was a remarkable coach and a remarkable man. And so and this was like, somebody from Yale talking, about, John Yalvickson at Harvard. And we spent, at least I spent a wonderful day with Dean Smith and Phil Ford and went to the Dean Dome, et cetera. And I can remember we were staying at a hotel right near the Raleigh-Durham airport. I got up that morning and I said, well, Grant, we've been to the promised land. We can go home. And then I met Coach K, and Coach K immediately impressed me as somebody that was going to be the right kind of person for my son. Not on the court, but in terms of what he believed in. And while Grant spent time with Coach K, I was given a tour of the Duke campus by Tommy Amaker and Billy King. I can recall, they were asking me questions, about a lot of things. And I was asking them questions about Duke and basketball, but they were asking me a lot of questions. And after about an hour and a half, I called Janet and told her, I said, I'm starting to feel disloyal to Dean. And after about 2 hours, I remember thinking, as a parent, basketball is going to begin and it will end. But there's something special about this place if it can produce two guys like Tommy Amaker and Billy King. And I remember thinking, by the time lunch, it was 3 hours, thinking to myself, forget basketball. If Grant can turn out to be like them, that would be really special. And to be sure, he ended up going to Duke, and it was 4 special years, and since 1994, it's been almost 17 years, and it's been 17 special years of an affiliation with Duke through my wife. What the president didn't say, I was on the board of visitors at the Divinity School. And if you know Dean Jones, who was the dean at the time, having gone to Perkins, we always thought that Perkins was the Methodist Divinity School. Well, when you at Duke, again, it's that sort of rivalry, but it was just a special time, and I met special people. And so Tommy, I tell Tommy all the time, he's now the coach at Harvard of all places. But I tell him that he and Coach K started something very special for me and my family, and we continue to revel in being a part of it.
So note to self, don't underestimate the importance of the campus visit.
Oh, no. I'll tell you another story, and this speaks to Coach K. When he made the next spring, the next fall, when he made his official visit, and I didn't realize it, but you are allowed 5 official visits, and they are paid for by the school. And the NCAA must send a list so every coach knows what other schools you're visiting. And I remember Coach K, turning to Grant, and he says, Grant, I see your official visits of Michigan, Virginia, North Carolina, us, and the University of Hawaii. and it wasn't Georgetown, because we were close enough to Georgetown. And he said, I can understand those other schools because I think I understand, what you're looking for. I don't understand the University of Hawaii. And Grant sort of explained, well, I just wanted to go to Hawaii, blah, blah, blah. And Coach K said, listen, I can't tell you where to go. And, if I would tell you anything, I would tell you only visit Duke. I don't want you to go to any of these other schools. He says, but you have to understand, we all have budgets, and we all are going after people. And he says, I don't think that you want to play at the University of Hawaii. You have to understand that coach has a limited budget, and if you take that trip, that may prevent somebody from getting the opportunity to go play there. And he said, the one thing that I really believe is, that, I'll be honest with you throughout the whole process if you come to Duke, and I want you to be honest with us. And, far be it for me to tell you where to visit, but, let's make sure that, the thing that I feel about you is that you are an honest broker. And the next morning, Grant called, got up, and he said, Dad, I think I'm canceling the visit to University of Hawaii. And I said, he said, it would be very disingenuous to go there. I said, that's good. He says, I'm also canceling the visit to Michigan. Now,
the Hawaii of the North.
Well, we were going to the University of Michigan that weekend, and I'd gotten a phone call from Bo Schembechler. They were playing Notre Dame, and Bo had told me that I was going to be on the sidelines with him. So I said, well, Grant, maybe you should wait until Monday to make your decision. And he says, no. He said, Coach K said something, and it really struck a chord. And I'm not gonna, I know where I want to go. And as I thought about it, I said, I've learned something from my son through Coach K. And and that's the beauty, I think, of Duke to me. I mean, not just Coach K, but all the other people that we've met in the medical school, Paul Hagen in the law school, just a purity and an honesty, and it's been special.
Well, let me turn and ask. Everyone knows that there are great countries in the world that have universities in which athletics plays no role. There's no sports teams of the Sorbonne. The Freie Universität does not have competitive sports teams. But in the genius of American education, sports take place inside universities. And you can argue this two different ways. You can say that's because sports have something profound to do with education. They are a form of education, provided they work as a complement to other forms of education. But then we all know there are different scenarios in which sports take the place of education, and a university can be known for its sports team, none of whose students are getting much education. So having your own career, Calvin, and Janet, you having your role, and having a son with this gift, you really must have faced the question of the relation of athletics and education, and the ambivalent relation of athletics and education, that they can be perfectly married or perfectly in competition with each other. So so you've spent years and years thinking about, you've spent years living it. With somebody, I'm really looking at you, Janet, to sort of ask you, you must have a family philosophy of the role of athletics in something larger than itself.
Well, we do. I mean, obviously, Calvin was a student athlete in high school and college and a professional athlete. So he established athletics and a professional athletic career as a legitimate career path, if you will. Children follow their parents. So many of you will see the same thing with your own children, and already have, perhaps. But also Calvin and myself had excellent educations. Let me stop and say that Grant feels that I am on the board of trustees, and Nancy's heard me say this, because I'm a Duke wannabe. So I have tried to convince him that I actually got a good education at Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. For whatever reason, he doesn't believe it. So I'm still trying to prove that to him. He knows he got an excellent education at Duke, and he knew that we would expect him to go to a good college, and I think he applied to very good schools. So the other schools that he applied to that Calvin just mentioned are excellent institutions. Our expectation would have been, wherever he went to school, that he would get a very good education, have a legitimate major, he majored in history, and that he would graduate, and that he would also play basketball, and he would figure out how to do that, because at that time it was maybe a 60 or 70 hour a week job, so to speak. I'm sure it's even more today. It's very, very high intensity in terms of playing at a school like Duke at a high profile.
It's not 60, I mean, that's...
Am I wrong?
No, I think, it's probably 3 hours a day.
No, I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that. I think playing for Coach K.
Hours a day.
I think playing for Coach K was really, really hard for Grant. And I mean, I think Grant was an excellent athlete under Coach K, but he's very, very demanding. And if he were standing here now, he would say the same thing. It was a demanding situation, if you will. Without Sterling, I agree. I don't think he could have graduated. Thank you, Sterling. But the education was extremely important to us, so there was never any suggestion that he would leave school early or anything like that. That wasn't going to happen, and it didn't happen. By the way, I mean, obviously the kids come into Duke and everywhere else, and some leave early, and I don't know all of their circumstances, but I regret it that they don't finish. Because the Duke education is extremely important, very valuable to him. And now that Grant is 39 years old and near the end of that professional career, he's acutely aware of how valuable it is.
How fun was it at the Nasher Gala this year to see Kyrie Irving studying the paintings, because since there isn't an NBA season, as far as he knows, he's come back to do more coursework, to work his way forward on the degree.
That's good.
I mean, I'd have to say I wasn't the famous star of my football team when I was in college. But if you're the president of a school that has great sports, you really have to learn things. And I feel one of the things I have learned is the way that sports are connected to profound forms of education, very different from what shows up on the transcript. The idea of how to live up to your potential, the idea of embracing discipline, the idea of teamwork, the idea of having a plan, but then going out there and 1 second later the plan isn't going to work anymore, so now you have to improvise a new plan in the wake of it. These are essential life skills. But I'd have to say a person who came out with those skills but didn't know how to read or write or add or subtract is going to have a partial education and not a whole one. And both of you have been very concerned with this. I mean, you and your work on the NCAA, you and your work on the Knight Commission, trying to figure out how to make athletics in the service of education rather than a dead end.
Well, the thing that's interesting, and again, my experience certainly at Yale, and Carm Koza and Bob Giegengak, who were my coaches there, but then also Coach K, Grant's coach. I always had the sense that their programs and the things they did were consistent with the academic mission of the university. And so, I'll give you an example. I remember Grant's freshman year, and Coach K, talking to me and saying, I really enjoy coaching Grant. He does what I ask him to do. He said, but it's going to be interesting. I look forward to the day where, and I like the fact he looks me right in the eye. And we established that eye contact. He says, but I look forward to the day where he's like Tommy, where, I'm telling him something that I want him to do, and he says, Coach, I hear what you're saying, but, I'm out on the floor, and this is what I see. And, all the things that you talk about, teamwork, setting goals, working together to achieve those goals, doing it within certain rules and regulations, being a part of something bigger than yourself, critical thinking, trying to figure out how to handle certain situations on a dime. Those are things that, as our good friend Bart Giovanni used to talk about, it's an educated mind. And I'll give you another story. In a former life, I was the vice president of the Baltimore Orioles. And one day I'm in my office and I get a phone call from Grant. My secretary tells me, it's Grant. He says it's very, very, very important. It was his sophomore year, and I interrupt what I'm doing. I get on the phone, and he says, Dad, and in his sophomore year, and Coach K had allowed him to have a car. He says, I locked myself out of my car. And I said, what do you mean you locked yourself out of the car? He'd gone to one of these, self-wash places with the wands, and somehow he had locked his keys and the car was running. And he says, what? I says, hold on, let me call the basketball office. I called the basketball office, and the colonel, Colonel Rogers, who had been came down from West Point with Mike when he came from West Point, and he answered the phone, and I told him what had happened, and he sort of chuckled, and he said, well, he'll figure it out. And I said, excuse me? He says, well, he wanted to go to college, and he wanted to be independent, and he wanted to have a car. So he'll figure it out. That's why they go to college, to figure those things out. Now, it was a minor thing, but, okay. And I got on the phone. I said, Grant, I'm busy. Figure it out. And he figured it out.
And do you know that car is still idling?
Oh, no. But, and there were lots of things.
Well, but to me, when I hear that story, after all, we parent children for the day when they won't need their parents, and you coach people for the day when they'll do things that you didn't tell them to do. And so it really is all of a piece, and that's what you're there for.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little? So now you have this role. You've had a role as a great player on the Cowboys, but then for many years you've had a role as something else, something to players or for players. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, after I retired I retired from the Cleveland Browns. That was the last team I played for in 1981. Janet says I actually retired in 1979, but I was on a roster for 2 years. And I retired from the Browns, and I went back to Washington, and I got a call about a month afterwards from Art Modell, who was the then owner, and Sam Rutigliano, the then coach. And it turned out they had a lot of issues with players, former teammates of mine, with money management, some substance abuse problems, et cetera. They asked me to come back. They wanted to talk to me. I thought they wanted me to play again. And I was concerned because, the tank was pretty empty at that juncture. But it turned out, they had these problems. And they didn't know what to do. I had been the captain of the team the 3 previous years. And so we sat down, and we also recruited a man named Paul Warfield, who had played for the Browns. And we sat down and we started we called it player development. And it was a series of programs designed to help players deal with the responsibilities of being a professional athlete. There's an English proverb that says, pray that a person does not enjoy success before they can endure success. And endurance is something that typically comes along, is developed over time. Well, suddenly a 21, 22-year-old young man who's never had anything or never had money, or we tell these guys that you couldn't get a date last year, now you think you're Denzel Washington. Understand what's going on and handle it responsibly. And so that's when I started in 81, and from 81 until 85 I did that with the Browns. In 86 I started with the Orioles, and although my responsibilities were different, we hired somebody within the Orioles to do it, and I did it up until 94. And then I got involved in some other projects, and then I got a call from Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys. I think it was 98. And you can probably remember a lot of the things that were happening with America's team at that juncture. And Jerry was very concerned. Concerned that guys were having issues dealing with the fame and fortune. But he also wanted to go beyond that and establish some preventative measures to try to help young people. We hired some, I sat down and I became a consultant, which is what I've done for the last 12 years. But we also hired a clinical psychologist. I thought it was important that we have a mental health person, a woman, that they would feel comfortable talking to, and we hired some other people. And I've been doing that, and it's been interesting. It's been fascinating.
You remind us of what we all know, which is the very gifts that open such amazing doors for people at very young ages, right? Also open the door to worlds of temptation that their contemporaries don't face, and that many of their contemporaries have been given a lot more life equipment for dealing with. And this is just part of the issue of modern sports. And you've thought about this on the Knight Commission and other places.
Yes, absolutely. The Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics is part of the Knight Foundation out of Miami, which is put together by the heirs to the Knight Ritter families. And what we're trying to do on the foundation board is to keep student athlete. It's tough. I mean, it's not tough at Duke, and it's not tough at Duke in any of our sports, men or women. But in some of our institutions in this country, our athletes are athletes first, and maybe students and maybe not students. So they're not getting the benefit of the rich experience of going to a major university in this country. So it's cute in basketball and in football, and so we're trying very hard.
Well, and you've made important recommendations, and the important ones have been implemented. Janet, I'm going to ask you a question, and this is my last one, and then I'll throw it open for a couple, and then we can go outside and have dessert, and you can ask them the questions you wished I'd really asked them. Okay. Okay. The thing is, if your husband is a professional football player and your son is a professional basketball player, this is a pretty small nation. It only has 3 people in it, and 2 of them are professional athletes. So this is a fairly macho household, one might say. And yet anybody who knows, any member of your family knows that there is total agreement on who the strongest member of your family is.
Well, thank you. Let's just say that they have learned to check their athletic egos at the door. Although
Did they come by that naturally, or did they learn it?
Oh, no, no, no. What has happened is we have in our house, I believe Sterling's been there, so we have to get you to come. We have a room that is a trophy room, and there may be 1,000 different trophies in there. There's nothing in the room that belongs to me. And the room is about as big as this stage, and it's just crowded, if you will. But everything is in that one room. So they are allowed to go in the room together and close the door. But not all over the house.
Well, you know, what's
Okay.
interesting, Dick, is you know, Janet took physics instead of physical education at Wellesley.
This is true.
But I will say this.
Is that how you fulfilled your phys ed requirement?
Well, he doesn't understand that
Jen, okay.
I'm a known non-athlete.
Let me interrupt. Do you play sports?
Not at all. No, I'm a professional spectator.
But the thing that's interesting is when Grant's wife, Tamia, was pregnant with their first child and with their second child. And I can remember, you know, not knowing what the sex would be. And I told Grant, I said, Grant, I said, you know, the biggest challenge is going to be if it's a boy. And, you know, letting that boy know if he wants to be something other than an athlete, it's okay. You know, I'm not, you know, I didn't try to push. I mean, Grant obviously liked sports, but I tried to support whatever he did and didn't want to push him into something. I've seen too many situations where people do something, not because they love it, or because, you know, it creates an excitement within themselves, but because they feel like somebody else wants them to do it. And you know, I mean, as it turned out, he has two daughters, 2 wonderful daughters, both of whom seem to be jocks. But, you know.
Well, one of them's studying Mandarin.
Oh, yeah, well, she's
that kind of jock.
But I just think, you know, I told him, I said, you know, you may have a son, and that son may, you know, turn out to be a musician or may turn out to be an artist. And I think whatever they want to do, you know, it's important that you be supportive and, you know, establish rules. But the key is that, you know, they allow, that they do what creates a spark within them.
And now comes this amazing moment in the history of the Hill family. Your parents had 1 child, your parents had 1 child, you got together, naturally you had 1 child, and strange to say, your son has had 2 children.
He's had 2 children.
And they're both girls. Okay.
Oh, it's
so
fabulous.
a whole new world is about,
Oh, yeah.
a whole new world is beginning.
Oh, it's so fabulous.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I'm just going to end by telling one story, which is when I was appointed president of Duke, there was a 6-month period when Nan was still president, and I came down almost every week to Durham. And at that point, some people who I'd had the privilege of knowing in my prior life wondered if I would ever have dinner with them in Washington. Do you remember this? And so I went out to dinner at about 7 o'clock with Janet and Calvin. And, you know, I knew them through my old life, but they knew my new life. And so we sat down. I don't think I said a single word that entire evening, right? Because they kept saying, and another good thing, and another good thing, and another good thing. And then our check came, and the check was paid, and we were there for at least 1 more hour after that. And so I'd have to say, it has been very nice for Duke to have had the conversion effect on the 2 of you. You have been very devoted. You have been enlightened supporters of the university in all its aspects, and I think that's what's so great for us, is when we hold you up, we're holding up not athletics by itself, we're holding up athletics as something that belongs with divinity, medicine, business, all those things together. That's the secret of a truly great university, and how fun for us to have people just so articulate and so thoughtful as you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, we ought to break and go back to the party. Is there, should I take a question or not?
Sure.
Yeah, sure, if you'd like.
2 questions. I'm sorry, none of us can see any of you, so please.
I have a question I've always wanted to know. The shot heard around the world is always ESPN shot in the NCAA. Was that practice? I heard rumors that they actually practiced that scenario 4 or 5 seconds.
Oh, you mean the Kentucky?
Yes.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. And I was talking to somebody earlier. You know, one of the things that I really judge a coach by is, you know, is he prepared for every eventuality? Does he have a play for every situation? And, you know, we were sitting or standing 2 rows behind the bench at night in Philadelphia. And I can remember when that kid from Kentucky hit that improbable shot. And there was, you know, they called timeout, and half the arena was crying, and the other half was going bananas. And it was, I can remember, I mean, Janet was joking, well, I guess I'll have to give up these cheap tickets for Minnesota.
The next week.
The next week. But I'm watching, and Bobby Hurley's little sister, she was, I don't know, 11 years old, and Tony Lang's brother, they were crying, and I was trying to console them. But what was fascinating to me was, you know, he makes the shot, and 3 players from Duke call timeout right away. They come to the sidelines, and I'm looking at the coaches and Coach
They're
K.
facing us, the players.
And,
there.
you know, Coach K is very calm. He talks to his assistants. He sits the players down. And then I turned to Janet. I said, you know, he's got to play. And I remember thinking, my God, he's got to play. I mean, it's not. I mean, you know, he's going. I thought I wasn't sure what it was going to be, but I said, you know, he's prepared himself for this situation. And as it turned out, that pass, they practice that every day in practice, and they ended practice with that play every day. And you know, as a guy who's been in professional sports for a long, long time, you know, you don't want to be surprised. I mean, you know, you may find yourself in a situation that you didn't anticipate, but do you have a play? Are you prepared to deal with that situation and not just go to the grab bag? And the great coaches, you know, have a play for every eventuality. I saw that with Bill Parcells. I certainly saw it with Coach Landry. And I've seen it with Jason Garrett. I mean, Jason Garrett has been very, very impressive. And I mean, the other thing you should know is, you know, Jason, I don't know if you knew it, but Jason spent 4 days down at Duke.
Cal's suggestion.
I suggested, just because of my great esteem for Coach K, as a coach. I mean, it's a different sport. And so he went down and spent 4 days. And he told me, he called me, he said, you know, I went there and I watched the first practice. He said, I saw the best practice I'd ever seen. And, you know, he's learned a lot, and hopefully, and I think Jerry feels this way, we have a coach for a long time.
Practice,
Just to add,
practice,
to that,
practice.
that Grant says that when he was sitting there, that Coach K told each one of them what to do on the play that he diagrammed. And he said that he actually got right up in his face and said, Grant, can you throw the ball 70 feet to the free throw line? Grant said, I don't know. but he said that was not the moment to say that. He said, yes. Then he got out of his face and I guess into the next face. And then he said to Christian, you are 9 for 9 from the field and 10 for 10 from the free throw line. They will not foul you. He also went back to Grant and said, and they're not going to put a man on you on the baseline. Big mistake. And so Grant could run the baseline because they had scored and get ready for his heave. But it was interesting that Grant wasn't sure he could do it. But because Coach K basically had this way with them of not just inspiring them, but empowering them to do something that had to be executed perfectly. And this one was.
What was interesting?
The rest is history.
What was interesting as an Olympic coach, and Grant was on the Olympic team in '96. Well, you know, Coach K was the Olympic coach for the last Olympiad, and one of the interesting things he did is he took 2 the members of that team, Kobe Bryant and LeBron James and all the members, all the great players, the current great players, he took them around the country. He took them to Army bases. He took them, he took them for the first time to the Statue of Liberty. When they were in Washington, he took them to the archives, and they looked at all those documents. He wanted them to understand who they were representing. And if you talk to the players on that team, they suddenly were not, just mercenaries trying to get a gold medal. They actually understood who they were representing.
It's fantastic.
And I think that's, along with the chapel and all the other, the Nasher.
President's office.
It's the president's office. But I mean, it's one of the. We've gotten to know some of the doctors at the.
I know you have.
And it's just.
Sure you have. Well, they put.
Well, I mean, I feel very blessed, and I will say this in front of you. I mean, as Dick knows, I love my university, and but through Grant, and I feel very, very blessed to be to enjoy the pleasure of your company as a P Duke 94.
P94. We know the year. Kelvin.
First of all, good evening. And I just wanted to say almost a year ago, Grant responded through a written letter to a small bit of controversy that happened in the media with a sort of movement that captured the nation back in the 80s during the Michigan-Duke Day rivalry. However, the letter was so beautiful and so beautifully written, I had to let my children read it to let them see the beauty and the class and the association with Duke University, to let them know this is how you respond to something like this. As a parent, I just wanted to say congratulations to you guys.
Fantastic.
Beautiful and amazing.
That's fantastic.
Beautiful and amazing.
Fantastic. Okay. And you are the very last.
My question is, can we continue this fascinating conversation and not to take a break?
The president now will answer this question. No. But it has been a great conversation. But the whole point is the conversation will continue. These guys will be the last people to leave if I have any experience of them. Just if you would just join me, what great friends of Duke University.
Thank you.
Thanks for everything.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.